The explosion hit like God's fist, punching through the earth. Ewan Greaves felt the mine shaft buckle beneath his boots as 2,000 tons of rock and coal dust cascaded from the ceiling. The emergency klaxon screamed through the tunnels, its wail barely audible over the thunderous collapse echoing from Shaft 7. "Jesus Christ, that's where the night crew went down," Dean Caro shouted, his headlamp cutting through the choking black cloud rolling toward them. Ewan was already moving, grabbing his rescue pack from the equipment cage. His hands moved with practiced efficiency, checking oxygen levels, testing his radio. 23 years in these tunnels had taught him that hesitation destroyed people. "Control, this is Greaves. We're going in after them." The radio crackled. "Negative, Ewan. Structure's compromised. Wait for—" He switched it off. Through the settling dust, he could hear something that made his blood freeze. Voices. Weak, desperate voices calling for help from deep inside the collapsed section. "There's someone alive in there," Dean said, his face pale under the coal dust. "Three someones," Ewan corrected, straining to listen. "Come on." They pushed into the devastation. The main support beam had snapped like a toothpick, leaving a narrow crawl space barely wide enough for a man. Ewan squeezed through first, his rescue light revealing a hellscape of twisted metal and shattered timber. "Help! Please!" The voice was young, too young. Ewan crawled faster, ignoring the jagged rocks tearing at his coveralls. Behind him, Dean's breathing was ragged with fear, but he kept following. That's what partners did down here. You never left someone behind. The crawl space opened into a small pocket of air. 3 miners huddled against the far wall, their faces streaked with blood and terror. 2 veterans Ewan recognized, and between them, barely 18 years old, was Tommy Briggs, the kid who'd started just 6 months ago, eager to follow his father into the mines. Tommy's leg was pinned under a steel beam, twisted at an angle that made Ewan's stomach turn. "We're getting you out," Ewan said, already calculating weight and leverage. The beam was massive, easily 300 pounds. In the confined space with the ceiling ready to collapse at any moment, it should have been impossible. But impossible was a luxury miners couldn't afford. "Dean, get the hydraulic jack. Now." For the next 40 minutes, Ewan worked with the focused intensity of a surgeon. Every movement was calculated, every breath controlled. The ceiling groaned ominously above them, dropping pebbles and dust in a steady rain that warned of imminent collapse. He got the first 2 miners out, half carrying them through the crawl space to safety. When he came back for Tommy, the kid was barely conscious, shock setting in from blood loss. "I can't feel my leg," Tommy whispered. "You will," Ewan promised, though he wasn't sure that was true. "Just hold on." The jack lifted the beam inch by agonizing inch. The moment there was enough clearance, Ewan pulled Tommy free and threw him over his shoulder in a fireman's carry. The kid weighed nothing, but in the narrow tunnel, every step was a battle. They were 20 feet from safety when the secondary collapse hit. The world exploded into chaos. Rock and debris rained down like hail, and Ewan felt something heavy slam into his back, driving him to his knees. His headlamp went out, plunging them into absolute darkness. "Ewan!" Dean's voice, distant and desperate. Ewan's ears were ringing and he could taste blood in his mouth, but Tommy was still breathing against his shoulder, still alive. That was all that mattered. He crawled blindly forward, following the faint current of fresh air that meant escape. His hands found the rope Dean had anchored at the entrance, and he used it to pull himself and Tommy toward the light. When they finally emerged into the main tunnel, a crowd of miners and rescue workers erupted in cheers. Someone took Tommy from his arms, rushing the kid toward the elevator. Ewan collapsed against the tunnel wall, his vision blurring. The last thing he remembered before passing out was Dean's voice, tight with worry. "Stay with me, partner. You did it. You got them all out." Ewan woke up to the antiseptic smell of hospital air and the soft beeping of machines. His head felt like it had been split open with a pickaxe, and his back was one solid mass of pain. But he was alive. The first face he saw wasn't his wife's. "Hey there, hero," Dean said from the chair beside his bed. His left arm was in a sling, and there were stitches across his forehead. "How you feeling?" "Like I got hit by a coal train," Ewan croaked. "How long was I out?" 2 days. Concussion, 3 cracked ribs, and a bruised spine. Doctor says you're lucky to be walking." Ewan tried to sit up and immediately regretted it. The room spun, and he had to close his eyes until the nausea passed. "Where's Natalie?" Dean's expression shifted, becoming carefully neutral. She had to work, some big presentation. She'll be here soon." Something in his friend's tone made Ewan look at him more closely. Dean was avoiding his eyes, fidgeting with the edge of his sling. "Dean, where's my wife?" Before Dean could answer, the door opened and Natalie Greaves walked in, talking rapidly into her phone. She held up one finger in Ewan's direction. "Wait a minute," and continued her conversation. "No, I understand the timeline is tight, but we can't move forward until the environmental impact study is complete. Yes, I'll have the revised projections to you by Friday." She was dressed in a sharp business suit that probably cost more than Ewan made in a month. Her blonde hair was perfectly styled, her makeup flawless. She looked like she was heading to a boardroom, not visiting her husband in the hospital. Ewan caught Dean's eye and saw something that made his chest tighten. Pity. "I have to go," Natalie said into the phone. "We'll continue this later." She slipped the phone into her purse and finally looked at Ewan. "How are you feeling?" "I've been better." Ewan's voice was flat. "Thanks for coming." "Of course." She leaned down to kiss his forehead, a perfunctory gesture that felt more like a business transaction than affection. "I'm sorry I couldn't get here sooner. This Ravens Hollow project is absolutely crazy right now." "Ravens Hollow?" "The Wellness Retreat Center. I've been telling you about it for months." She pulled out her phone again as it buzzed. "We're converting the old mining land into a luxury destination. Yoga studios, meditation gardens, the whole 9 yards. It's going to completely transform this town." Dean made a sound that might have been a snort. Natalie glanced at him sharply. "Something funny, Dean?" "Just thinking about meditation gardens where we used to dig coal," Dean said. "Seems ironic." "It's called progress," Natalie replied coolly. "Not everyone wants to stay buried in the past." The words hit Ewan like a physical blow. Buried in the past. While he'd been literally buried in a mine, risking his life to save 3 men, his wife had been planning to erase the very industry that defined their town. "I need to take this," Natalie said as her phone rang again. She stepped into the hallway, her voice already shifting back to business mode. Dean waited until she was gone, then leaned forward. "Ewan, there's something you need to know." "What?" "She wasn't here the first day. When they brought you in, unconscious and covered in blood, she wasn't here. I called her myself, told her you might not make it. You know what she said?" Ewan's throat felt dry. "What?" "She said she was in the middle of a crucial meeting and couldn't leave. Asked me to keep her updated by text." The machines monitoring Ewan's vitals began beeping faster. His heart rate was climbing, but it wasn't from his injuries. "That's not all," Dean continued, his voice low. "The past few months, while you were working extra shifts to pay for that house renovation she wanted, she's been spending a lot of time with someone from her company, a guy named Caleb Holt. He's some kind of consultant, comes around town in a fancy BMW talking about optimizing human potential." Meaning I've seen them together. A lot. And not just for business." Before Ewan could respond, Natalie returned, sliding her phone into her purse with practiced efficiency. "The doctor says you can go home tomorrow," she announced. "That's good timing. I have the award ceremony tomorrow night." "Award ceremony?" "For the rescue. The company is giving you a commendation for heroism. They're making a whole event out of it. Good publicity for the Wellness Center project." Ewan stared at her. His wife was talking about his near-death experience like it was a marketing opportunity. "I should go," Natalie said, checking her watch. "Caleb and I have dinner with the investors tonight. Are you okay getting home on your own tomorrow?" "I'll drive him," Dean said quickly. "Perfect." Natalie kissed Ewan's forehead again, the same cold, perfunctory gesture. "Get some rest. Tomorrow's going to be a big day." She left, without looking back. Dean waited until her footsteps faded down the hall, then pulled out his phone. "There's something else you need to see." The video was grainy, shot from a distance, but clear enough. Natalie and a tall man with perfectly styled hair were standing in Ewan's own driveway, embracing. Not a business handshake or a friendly hug, a long, intimate embrace between lovers. The timestamp showed Tuesday, 3:47 p.m. The same Tuesday, Ewan had been fighting for his life in the collapsed mine. "I'm sorry, brother," Dean said quietly. "I've been wrestling with whether to tell you, but you deserve to know." Ewan stared at the screen until the video ended, then handed the phone back. His hands were steady, his voice calm. "Don't be sorry, I needed to see it." But inside, something had shifted. The man who'd gone into that mine to save 3 lives had died in the collapse. What had crawled out was something else entirely. Something that understood exactly what needed to be done. The award ceremony was held at the Ravens Hollow Community Center, a building that had seen better decades. The walls were decorated with banners proclaiming mining heroes and corporate partnership, as if courage and capitalism were somehow related. Ewan sat at the head table, still moving carefully because of his injuries, wearing his only suit. It was 5 years old and had been fitted when he was 20 pounds heavier, but it was the best he had. The crowd was a mix of miners and their families, local politicians, and a handful of people in expensive suits who were clearly from Natalie's company. They looked like they'd rather be anywhere else. "Ladies and gentlemen," the mayor began, "we're here tonight to honor a true hero. Ewan Greaves risked his life to save 3 men trapped in our mine. His courage represents the best of what our community stands for." Polite applause. Ewan noticed that the corporate contingent clapped like they were at a golf tournament. Brief, restrained, obligatory. "I'd like to introduce Caleb Holt from Meridian Wellness Solutions, who will present the award." Caleb Holt strode to the microphone with the confidence of a man who'd never doubted his own importance. He was exactly what Ewan had expected. Tall, handsome in a generic way, with the kind of perfect smile that cost thousands of dollars in dental work. "Thank you, Mayor Davidson," Caleb began, his voice smooth and practiced. "Tonight we celebrate not just heroism, but the spirit of transformation. Ewan Greaves represents the courage to dive deep, to go into the darkness and bring people back to the light." He paused for effect, scanning the crowd with the timing of a professional speaker. "This is exactly the kind of energy we want to cultivate at the Ravens Hollow Wellness Retreat. The courage to confront our inner darkness, to rescue our authentic selves from the depths of—" "Oh, for Christ's sake," someone muttered from the back. Caleb's smile never wavered. "The partnership between Meridian Wellness and this community represents a new chapter. We're not just building a retreat center. We're building a future where courage and honesty aren't just survival skills, they're paths to enlightenment." As he spoke, Ewan watched Natalie. She was seated at a table near the front, hanging on Caleb's every word. When he mentioned courage and honesty, she actually nodded appreciatively. The irony was so thick Ewan could taste it. "Ewan Greaves didn't hesitate when lives were on the line," Caleb continued. "He understood that sometimes you have to leave the safety of the surface and descend into the depths to save what matters most." He gestured grandly toward Ewan. "That's the kind of commitment we need from all our partners as we transform Ravens Hollow into something extraordinary." More applause. Caleb walked over to present the award, a crystal paperweight with Ewan's name engraved on it. As he leaned down, his hand brushed against Natalie's shoulder. The touch lingered just a moment too long. "Congratulations, hero," Caleb said quietly, his voice just loud enough for Ewan to hear. "I hope you understand what you're truly capable of." Ewan took the award and stood at the microphone. The crowd quieted, waiting for his speech. He looked out at the faces, miners who'd worked beside him for decades, their wives and children, people who understood that courage wasn't a corporate buzzword. It was what you did when everything went to hell and people were depending on you. "Thank you," he said simply. "I just did what anyone would do." He started to step away from the microphone, then stopped. "Actually, there's one thing I want to add. The men I pulled out of that mine, they weren't just victims, they were partners. In the mines, you don't survive alone. You survive because the person next to you is willing to risk everything to bring you home." His eyes found Natalie in the crowd. She was texting on her phone, not listening. "The most important thing about going deep," Ewan continued, "is making sure the people you trust are still there when you come back to the surface." The crowd applauded, but Ewan was already walking away from the microphone. He'd said what needed to be said. After the ceremony, there was a reception with cheap wine and grocery store sheet cake. Ewan found himself surrounded by well-wishers, people who'd known him since he was a kid, who understood exactly what he'd risked in that mine. "Hell of a thing you did," said Martha Pike, whose husband had died in a mining accident 15 years earlier. "Tommy Briggs's mother called me crying, said she'd never be able to thank you enough." "Just glad everyone made it out," Ewan replied. "Not everyone gets to be a hero," Martha continued. "Most of us just try to get through the day without hurting anyone. But you've got something special." Across the room, Ewan spotted Natalie and Caleb standing close together near the refreshment table. They were speaking in low voices, Caleb's hand resting casually on her lower back. "Excuse me," Ewan told Martha. "I need some air." He stepped outside into the cool evening air, pulling out his phone. The parking lot was mostly empty except for a few pickup trucks and one gleaming BMW that obviously belonged to Caleb. As he stood there, his phone buzzed with an airdrop notification from an unknown sender. He almost ignored it, but something made him accept the file. It was a video. The footage was shot from inside a car looking across the street at Ewan's house. The timestamp showed Wednesday afternoon, yesterday, while he was still in the hospital. Natalie's car was in the driveway, and beside it was the same BMW from the parking lot. The front door of his house opened, and Natalie appeared, followed by Caleb. They were both disheveled, clothes slightly askew. Caleb pulled Natalie against him for a long, passionate kiss right there on Ewan's front porch. But it was the audio that made Ewan's blood run cold. The video had sound, and whoever shot it had been close enough to catch their conversation. God, I needed that, Natalie's voice, breathless with satisfaction. I can't stand another minute in that hospital room, pretending to be the devoted wife. How much longer do you think you'll have to keep up the act? Caleb asked. Not much longer. The insurance payout from his accident should be enough to get me out of here, and once the wellness center is approved, this whole town will be transformed. Property values will skyrocket. What about Ewan? Natalie laughed, a sound without warmth. What about him? He'll probably spend the rest of his life underground, covered in coal dust, telling stories about his big rescue. Men like that never change. They never grow. And you're ready to grow? I've been ready for years. I just needed the right opportunity. She kissed him again. The right partner. The video ended. Ewan stared at the blank screen, his mind working with the same methodical precision he used underground. Every detail, every implication, every possible angle. His phone buzzed with a text from the same unknown number. You deserve to know the truth. A friend. Ewan deleted the text, but saved the video to his phone. Then he walked back inside, his expression carefully neutral. The reception was winding down. Natalie was saying goodbye to Caleb and his colleagues. The picture of professional courtesy. When she saw Ewan approaching, she smiled brightly. There you are. Ready to go home? Absolutely, Ewan replied. I can't wait to get back to our house. He emphasized the word our just slightly, watching her reaction, but Natalie's smile never wavered. She was better at this than he'd given her credit for. On the drive home, she chattered about the ceremony, the corporate partnership, the bright future ahead for Ravens Hollow. Ewan made appropriate responses, asked the right questions, played the role of the grateful husband, but his mind was already working on a different problem entirely. In the mines, when you encountered a gas leak or structural weakness, you didn't panic. You made a plan. You gathered information. You identified every possible point of failure. And then you brought the whole thing down in a controlled collapse. The next morning, Ewan called in sick to work. Dean stopped by around 10, concerned. You sure you're okay? You look like hell. Just tired, Ewan said, leading his friend into the kitchen. Coffee? Sure. Dean sat at the table studying Ewan's face. What's really going on? You've been weird since yesterday. Ewan poured 2 cups and sat across from Dean. His oldest friend, the man who'd followed him into a collapsing mine without hesitation. I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest. Shoot. How long have you known about Natalie and Caleb? Dean's coffee cup stopped halfway to his mouth. Ewan, how long? Dean set down the cup and rubbed his face. 6 weeks, maybe 2 months. I wasn't sure at first. Thought maybe I was seeing things. But then I started paying attention. Why didn't you tell me sooner? Because I hoped I was wrong. Because you're my best friend, and I didn't want to be the one to destroy your marriage. Because... He trailed off, looking miserable. Because what? Because I was afraid of what you'd do. Ewan nodded slowly. Show me what you know. For the next hour, Dean laid out everything he'd observed. The meetings that went too late, the unexplained trips out of town, the way Natalie's entire personality changed when she talked about the wellness center project. She's been different for months, Dean said. Ever since this Caleb guy showed up, like she's been planning something. She has been, Ewan said quietly. He pulled out his phone and showed Dean the video from the night before. Dean watched in silence, his expression growing darker with each word. When it ended, he looked up at Ewan with a mixture of anger and sympathy. Jesus, brother, I'm sorry. Don't be sorry. Be helpful. Ewan's voice was calm, controlled. I need to know everything about Caleb Holt and this wellness center project. Everything. What are you planning? I'm planning to do what I do best, Ewan replied. Go deep, gather information, and make sure everyone gets what they deserve. Dean was quiet for a long moment. This isn't the mines, Ewan. You can't just collapse the whole thing and walk away. Can't I? The look in Ewan's eyes made Dean shift uncomfortably. What do you need me to do? Help me understand exactly what I'm dealing with. How much of this wellness center project is legitimate, and how much is just a way for Natalie and Caleb to cash in on our town's transformation? You think there's fraud involved? I think there are a lot of questions that need answers, and I think the people of Ravens Hollow deserve to know who they're really dealing with. Dean nodded slowly. I'll make some calls. I know a guy who works for the county planning office, another one at the state environmental agency. If there's something shady about this project, we'll find it. Good. And Dean, keep this between us for now. Of course. Dean stood to leave, then turned back. For what it's worth, she doesn't deserve you. Never did. After Dean left, Ewan spent the rest of the day doing what he'd learned to do in the mines. Methodical preparation. He researched Meridian Wellness Solutions, traced their corporate structure, looked up their previous projects. What he found was interesting. Meridian had been involved in 3 similar wellness retreat projects in the past 5 years. Each time they'd come into a struggling rural community, promised transformation and jobs, then left behind a handful of overpriced facilities that catered to wealthy urbanites while pricing out the locals. But the real money wasn't in the wellness center itself, it was in the land speculation. Meridian would identify undervalued property in economically depressed areas, partner with local development companies to drive up property values, then sell at massive profits once the area was revitalized. The locals got a few temporary construction jobs and a retreat center they couldn't afford to use. Meridian's investors got rich. Ewan was still researching when Natalie came home from work, looking frazzled. Rough day? He asked. You have no idea. The environmental impact study is taking forever, and some of the locals are asking uncomfortable questions about the project's long-term benefits. She dropped her purse and rubbed her temples. Sometimes I think this town doesn't want to be saved. Maybe they just want to understand what they're being saved from. Natalie looked at him sharply. What do you mean? Nothing. Just thinking about what Caleb said last night, about transformation and new chapters. Sometimes change is hard for people to accept. Her expression softened. Exactly. You understand, because you've seen what this place can be. The courage, the potential. Most people here are just stuck. Stuck in what? The past, old ways of thinking. They can't see beyond coal dust and paycheck-to-paycheck living. She moved closer, running her hand along his arm. That's what makes you different. You're willing to risk everything for something better. Ewan looked into his wife's eyes and saw a stranger, someone who could stand in their kitchen and lie with perfect sincerity, who could touch him with the same hands that had embraced another man in their driveway. I should get dinner started, he said. Actually, I can't stay. I have another meeting with the investors. We're trying to expedite the approval process. With Caleb, among others, she kissed his cheek. Don't wait up, this could go late. After she left, Ewan called Dean. How much did you find out? More than you're going to like. Can you meet me at Murphy's bar in an hour? Murphy's was the kind of place where miners went to drink away their shifts, a dim, honest bar that had never pretended to be anything other than what it was. Ewan and Dean took a corner booth, away from the handful of other patrons. Okay, here's what I learned, Dean said, pulling out a manila folder. Meridian Wellness Solutions is owned by a larger investment group based in Chicago. They specialize in what they call rural revitalization through luxury development. Meaning? Meaning they find dying towns with valuable natural resources or scenic locations, then transform them into playgrounds for rich people. The locals get displaced, property taxes skyrocket, and the community loses its identity. Dean opened the folder and showed Ewan a series of photographs. This is Pine Ridge, Montana. 3 years ago, it was a struggling logging community. Meridian came in, built a forest wellness sanctuary, and turned it into a luxury resort. Now, the average home price is 3 times what it was. Most of the original residents have been forced to move, and the logging families who built that town can't afford to live there anymore. The photos showed a transformation that was both impressive and heartbreaking. Pristine facilities surrounded by manicured landscapes where rough-hewn homes had once stood. This is what they want to do to Ravens Hollow, Dean continued. But there's more. I found records of the initial land surveys. Meridian has already identified 12 properties they want to acquire, including the old mine property where you nearly died. Who owns those properties now? Mix of things. Some are privately owned by mining families, some are owned by the mining company, and some are public land that would need to be sold through the county. And Natalie's job is to facilitate the acquisitions. More than that. She's the local liaison. Her job is to identify key properties, build relationships with owners, and smooth the way for Meridian to acquire everything at below market prices. Ewan studied the documents. How do they keep the prices low? They don't tell people what the land is really worth. They present themselves as the town's saviors, offering to buy worthless mining land for generous prices. The owners think they're getting a good deal on property that will never be valuable again. But once the wellness center is approved and the area is rezoned, property values double or triple overnight. Meridian flips the land to their development partners and walks away with millions. Ewan leaned back in his booth, processing the information. It's brilliant, evil, but brilliant. There's more, Dean said quietly. I talked to my buddy at the environmental agency. The impact study that's holding up the project? It's not really about environmental protection. There are some serious concerns about groundwater contamination from the old mine sites. If that gets out, the whole project collapses. So they need to either solve the contamination problem or make it disappear. Right. And guess who's been pushing for an expedited approval process that would bypass the full environmental review? Ewan didn't need to guess. What kind of contamination are we talking about? Heavy metals? Chemical runoff from mining operations? The kind of thing that makes land worthless for development unless you're willing to spend millions on cleanup. Or unless you know how to make the problem go away through other means. They sat in silence for a moment, the implications sinking in. There's one more thing, Dean said. I checked the county records for recent property transfers. In the past 6 months, 3 mining families have sold their land to shell companies connected to Meridian. All of them got what they thought were good prices. How good? About half of what the land will be worth once it's rezoned for commercial development. Ewan's hands tightened around his beer bottle. These are people I've known my whole life. Families who've been here for generations. I know, and they have no idea they're being robbed. What about the contamination issue? If the environmental study reveals serious problems, does that kill the project? It should. But there are ways around it if you have the right connections and enough money to make problems disappear. Ewan finished his beer and stood up. I need to think about this. What are you going to do? What I always do. The right thing. But as Ewan drove home through the familiar streets of Raven's Hollow, he realized that the right thing might be more complicated than he'd ever imagined. Natalie didn't come home that night. Ewan waited until midnight, then called her cell phone. It went straight to voicemail. He left a message expressing concern, playing the worried husband perfectly. She texted back at 12:47 a.m. Meeting ran late, staying at hotel. See you tomorrow. Ewan stared at the message, then opened his laptop and began to work. If Natalie wanted to play games, he'd show her what a real game looked like. He started by installing monitoring software on their shared home computer, the one Natalie used for work when she wasn't at the office. It was surprisingly easy. A few clicks, and he had access to everything she typed, every website she visited, every email she sent. Then he turned his attention to the house itself. Hidden cameras were cheap and easy to install if you knew what you were doing. Ewan had learned electronics during his years in the mines, where monitoring systems meant the difference between life and death. By dawn, he had surveillance coverage of every room where Natalie might bring Caleb. Not because he wanted to watch them together, that would be torture, but because he needed evidence of what they were really planning. Natalie came home around noon, looking refreshed and guilty in equal measure. How was your meeting? Ewan asked, not looking up from his newspaper. Productive. We made real progress on some of the regulatory issues. She poured herself coffee and sat across from him. How are you feeling? You look tired. Couldn't sleep. Worried about you. I'm sorry. I should have called instead of just texting. It's just, this project is consuming my life right now. Tell me about it. What makes this wellness center so important? For the next 20 minutes, Natalie explained the project with genuine enthusiasm. The jobs it would create, the economic revitalization, the way it would put Raven's Hollow on the map as a destination. Everything she said sounded wonderful. If you didn't know about the land speculation, the environmental cover-up, and the systematic exploitation of local families. It sounds like you really believe in this, Ewan said when she finished. I do. This is our chance to build something better, to leave the mining life behind and create a future worth having. Our future? Of course. She reached across the table and took his hand. I know this is all happening fast, but I want you to be a part of it. Caleb was saying just last night that we could use someone with your leadership skills, your reputation in the community. Caleb was talking about me? He was impressed by your speech at the ceremony. He thinks you could be a real asset to the project. Ewan squeezed her hand gently. What kind of asset? Community outreach, helping local families understand the benefits of partnering with Meridian. You're someone they trust, someone they'd listen to. The full scope of their plan was becoming clear. They didn't just want to deceive the people of Raven's Hollow. They wanted to use Ewan to help them do it. I'd like to learn more, he said. Maybe I could meet with Caleb, hear his vision firsthand. Natalie's face lit up. Really? That would be wonderful. I know he'd love to talk with you. Set it up. After Natalie left for work, Ewan spent the afternoon reviewing the footage from his hidden cameras. There wasn't much, just Natalie moving through the house, getting ready for work, making phone calls. But the phone calls were interesting. We need to move faster on the land acquisitions, she said during one conversation. The environmental study is asking too many questions, and if the contamination issue becomes public, we'll lose everything. Another call later. I don't care what it costs. We need that report buried or revised. This deal is worth too much to let some bureaucrat with a clipboard destroy it. And finally, Ewan's starting to ask questions about the project. I think we should bring him in as a consultant. If he's working for us, he won't be working against us. By evening, Ewan had a clear picture of what he was dealing with. Natalie wasn't just having an affair. She was actively conspiring to defraud the people of Raven's Hollow, including her own husband. When she came home that night, she was excited. I talked to Caleb. He wants to meet with you tomorrow evening. A dinner at the Riverside Inn, just the three of us. Sounds perfect. Ewan, I want you to know how much this means to me. Having you involved in something I care about, it feels like we're finally building something together. She kissed him, and for a moment, Ewan almost believed her. Almost forgot about the video, the lies, the betrayal. But then he remembered Tommy Briggs, barely 18, trapped under that steel beam. He remembered the trust in the kid's eyes when Ewan promised to get him out. Trust was sacred, and Natalie had broken it in the worst possible way. The Riverside Inn was Raven's Hollow's attempt at upscale dining, white tablecloths, dim lighting, and prices that made most locals eat elsewhere. Ewan arrived exactly on time, wearing his good shirt and the sport jacket Natalie had bought him for Christmas. Caleb was already there, looking perfectly at ease in a setting that would have intimidated most minors. He stood and extended his hand with a practiced smile. Ewan, so good to finally meet you properly. Natalie's told me so much about you. Likewise, Ewan replied, accepting the handshake. Caleb's grip was firm but soft, the hands of a man who'd never done physical labor. Please sit. I took the liberty of ordering a bottle of wine. I hope you don't mind. The wine was probably worth more than Ewan made in a day, but he accepted a glass and played his role. This is nice. I don't get out to places like this very often. Well, that's about to change, Caleb said, his eyes bright with enthusiasm. If what Natalie tells me is true, you're exactly the kind of partner we need for this project. For the next hour, Caleb laid out his vision for the Raven's Hollow Wellness Retreat. He spoke passionately about transformation, about helping people discover their authentic selves, about creating a space where urban professionals could reconnect with nature and find inner peace. It was a compelling presentation, delivered with the polish of someone who'd given it many times before. And if Ewan hadn't known what he knew, he might have been convinced. The wellness industry is exploding, Caleb explained over the main course. People are desperate for authentic experiences, for a chance to escape the noise of modern life. This retreat will give them that, while providing unprecedented economic opportunity for the local community. What kind of economic opportunity? Ewan asked. Jobs, obviously, construction, maintenance, hospitality. But more than that, we're talking about a complete economic transformation. Property values will rise, new businesses will open to serve our guests, and Raven's Hollow will become a destination instead of a place people leave. That sounds almost too good to be true. Caleb laughed. I understand the skepticism, but I've seen it work in other communities. Pine Ridge, Montana is a perfect example. What happened there? Complete revitalization. When we arrived, Pine Ridge was dying. Unemployment above 20%, young people moving away, businesses closing. Now it's thriving. Property values have tripled, unemployment is virtually zero, and the community has a sustainable future. What happened to the people who lived there before? For just a moment, Caleb's smooth expression flickered. What do you mean? The logging families, the longtime residents, where did they end up? Well, naturally, some people chose to relocate as the area transformed. But that's the nature of progress. You can't make an omelet without breaking a few eggs. Ewan nodded thoughtfully. And the environmental issues? Natalie mentioned there were some concerns about the old mining sites. Minor technical issues, Caleb said dismissively. Every development project has regulatory hurdles. The important thing is keeping our eyes on the bigger picture, which is creating something beautiful from something that's been abandoned and forgotten, turning scars into gardens. Natalie reached across the table and squeezed Ewan's hand. That's what I love about this project. We're not just building a business, we're healing the land. Tell me about the land acquisition process, Ewan said. How do you decide which properties to purchase? Caleb's eyes sharpened slightly. Why do you ask? I'm curious about the timeline. Some of my friends own property that might be valuable to the project. I'd hate for them to miss out on a good opportunity. That's very thoughtful of you, Caleb said carefully. Natalie handles most of the local relationships. Perhaps you could work with her to identify families who might be interested in partnering with us. I'd be happy to help, Ewan replied. What kind of prices are you offering? Fair market value, of course. We're not trying to take advantage of anyone. What's fair market value for mining land that hasn't been profitable in 20 years? Caleb smiled, but there was no warmth in it. That depends on many factors. Location, acreage, development potential. Each situation is unique. Ewan sensed he was pushing too hard and backed off. I'm just thinking about my neighbors. These are good people who've had a tough few years. And that's exactly why this project is so important, Natalie said. We're offering them a way out, a chance to build something better. Speaking of which, Caleb said, I'd like to discuss your potential role in the project. For the next 20 minutes, they outlined their offer. Ewan would serve as a community liaison, helping to build support for the wellness center and facilitating relationships between Meridian and local property owners. The salary they offered was more than he made as a miner, with the possibility of performance bonuses based on successful land acquisitions. It was a generous offer and a clever trap. I'm interested, Ewan said when they finished. But I need to understand more about the business model. How does Meridian make money on this? Multiple revenue streams, Caleb explained. Retreat bookings, private workshops, corporate team building events. We also partner with luxury hospitality brands to offer premium experiences. And land development? Caleb's smile tightened almost imperceptibly. Real estate is always a component of any major project like this. But our primary focus is the wellness experience. Of course, I just want to make sure I understand all the moving pieces before I commit to anything. Absolutely. Due diligence is crucial in any business relationship. They finished dinner with small talk about the town, the weather, the upcoming holidays. Caleb paid the check with a credit card that looked like it was made of actual metal. In the parking lot, Natalie hugged Ewan enthusiastically. That went so well. I can tell Caleb really likes you. He seems like a smart guy, Ewan replied. Very focused. He has to be. There's a lot of money at stake. She kissed his cheek. I'm proud of you for being open to this. I know change isn't easy. No, it isn't, Ewan agreed. But sometimes change is necessary. Caleb shook hands again, his grip a little too firm this time. I look forward to working together, Ewan. I think we're going to accomplish great things. I hope so, Ewan said. I really do. He drove home in silence, his mind working through everything he'd learned. Caleb was smooth, confident, and completely convinced of his own righteousness. The kind of man who could destroy a community and sleep well at night, secure in the knowledge that he was bringing progress. Natalie was equally convinced, but for different reasons. She saw the project as her ticket to a better life, a way to escape the limitations of being a coal miner's wife in a dying town. Neither of them seemed to understand that they were stealing from people who had trusted them, but Ewan understood, and now he knew exactly what he needed to do. The next morning, Dean found Ewan in his garage, working on his motorcycle. The bike was 20 years old and hadn't run in 5, but Ewan was methodically cleaning and repairing every component. Planning a road trip? Dean asked. Just thinking. I do my best thinking with my hands busy. Ewan didn't look up from the carburetor he was rebuilding. How's your guy at the environmental agency? Worried. The pressure to expedite the wellness center approval is coming from pretty high up the food chain. State senators, department heads, people who don't usually get involved in local environmental reviews. Money talks. Yeah, but there's something else. He thinks the contamination at the old mine sites is worse than anyone's letting on. Heavy metals, chemical runoff, the kind of thing that could poison groundwater for miles around. Ewan's hands stopped moving. How bad? Bad enough that developing the land without proper remediation could be criminal negligence. We're talking about potential cancer clusters, birth defects, the works. And Meridian knows this? They have to. The preliminary environmental assessment was delivered to them 6 weeks ago. Ewan set down his tools and finally looked at Dean. They're not just stealing from our neighbors. They're potentially poisoning them. Looks that way. The question is, what are we going to do about it? Before Ewan could answer, his phone buzzed with a text from Natalie. Meeting ran late again. Won't be home until tomorrow. Love you. Ewan showed the message to Dean, who shook his head in disgust. She's not even trying to be subtle anymore. She doesn't think she needs to be. As far as she's concerned, I'm either too stupid or too trusting to figure out what's happening. So, what's the plan? Ewan was quiet for a long moment, thinking. Remember when we were kids, and you dared me to explore that abandoned mine shaft up on Copper Ridge? Yeah. We got about 50 feet down before you realized it was filling with gas, and we had to get out fast. Right. But I went back the next week with proper equipment, mapped the whole system, found 3 different ways in and 2 ways out. Okay. The thing about underground work is that it requires patience. You don't just start digging. You study the geology, understand the structural weaknesses, plan every step. And when you're ready to bring something down, you don't just light a stick of dynamite and hope for the best. Dean's eyes widened as he understood. You're going to take down the whole project. I'm going to expose what they're really doing. The fraud, the environmental cover-up, all of it. But I need to do it right, with evidence that will stand up in court and protect the people of this town. That's going to take time. I've got time, and I've got something else they don't expect. What's that? Inside access. They think they've recruited me. They want me to help them convince my neighbors to sell their land. That means they're going to trust me with information they wouldn't share with anyone else. Dean grinned for the first time in days. You're going to be a double agent. I'm going to be exactly what they think I am. A simple coal miner who wants what's best for his community. The difference is, what's best for this community isn't what they're selling. What do you need me to do? Keep working your contacts at the county and state level. I need to know every detail of the environmental assessment, every permit application, every piece of correspondence between Meridian and government officials. Done. What else? I need information about the other communities where Meridian has done projects. Names, contact information for residents who were displaced. I want to document the pattern. I can handle that too. Ewan picked up his tools and went back to work on the motorcycle. And Dean, this has to stay between us. If Natalie or Caleb suspects what I'm really doing, people could get hurt. You think they'd get violent? I think when people have invested millions of dollars in a fraud, they'll do whatever it takes to protect that investment. That afternoon, while Natalie was presumably in another meeting, Ewan received a call from Caleb. Ewan, I hope you don't mind me calling directly. I wanted to follow up on our conversation last night. Of course. I've been thinking about everything we discussed. Excellent. I was wondering if you might be available for a more detailed briefing this afternoon. There are some aspects of the project I'd like to share with you, information that's not public yet. I'm interested. Perfect. Can you meet me at the project site in an hour? I'll show you exactly what we're planning. The project site was a 100-acre plot that included 3 former mine entrances and a stretch of the old railway that had once carried coal to the river. It was beautiful land, rolling hills covered with second-growth forest. But it bore the scars of decades of mining, rusted equipment, abandoned buildings, and the subtle discoloration of soil that had been contaminated by industrial runoff. Caleb was waiting in his BMW, dressed in designer outdoor gear that probably cost more than most people in Ravens Hollow made in a month. Beautiful, isn't it? He said as Ewan approached. You can really see the potential when you know what to look for. It's something, all right? I haven't been up here in years. The transformation is going to be incredible. Luxury cabins along the ridgeline, a spa facility overlooking the valley, meditation gardens where those old mine buildings stand now. Caleb pulled out an iPad and showed Ewan the architectural renderings. They were impressive. Sleek, modern buildings that seem to grow organically from the landscape, connected by winding paths and water features. The wellness center itself will be built right here, Caleb said, pointing to a cleared area near the largest mine entrance. We're calling it the Transformation Portal, a symbolic gateway between the old life and the new. Clever marketing. Everything in this business is about narrative. Our guests don't just want a vacation, they want a story they can tell about themselves. The story of how they found courage, discovered their authentic selves, transformed their lives. And what story do the local families get to tell? Caleb looked at him sharply. What do you mean? The people who've been here for generations. What's their narrative in all this? Their narrative is that they're part of something bigger than themselves. They're the foundation of a new community, the bedrock of transformation. Even the ones who have to sell their land and move away? Ewan, I'm going to be honest with you because I think you can handle the truth. Every major development project involves some displacement. It's unfortunate, but it's also inevitable. We can't preserve every piece of the past if we want to build a better future. I understand that. I'm just trying to figure out how to explain it to my neighbors. Caleb's expression softened. That's exactly why we need you. You understand these people, you speak their language. You can help them see that what we're offering isn't just money, it's opportunity. What kind of opportunity? The opportunity to be pioneers in a new kind of economy. The wellness industry is worth hundreds of billions of dollars globally, and it's growing every year. The people who get in early, who become partners instead of just employees, are the ones who build generational wealth. How does that work? For the next hour, Caleb explained Meridian's partnership program. Selected local families would be offered the chance to invest in the wellness center itself, becoming shareholders in the project rather than just selling their land. It sounded generous until Ewan understood the details. The minimum investment was $50,000, more than most mining families could afford. The projected returns were impressive, but only if the project succeeded exactly as planned. And the fine print gave Meridian complete control over all major decisions. So basically, you're asking people to bet their life savings on a business they don't control, Ewan said. I'm asking them to bet on themselves, on their community, on the belief that they deserve something better than a dying coal town. And if the project fails, it won't fail. I've done this before, Ewan. I know what works. Caleb walked him over to the edge of the old mine entrance, now sealed with concrete and warning signs. Look at this place. Really look at it. What do you see? Ewan studied the scarred landscape, the rusted equipment, the subtle signs of environmental damage. I see the place where my father worked, where I worked, where 3 men nearly died last week. I see possibility. I see a chance to heal decades of environmental damage and create something beautiful from something broken. What about the contamination? Caleb's expression didn't change, but something shifted in his eyes. What contamination? Natalie mentioned there were some environmental concerns, heavy metals, chemical runoff from the mining operations. Minor issues. Every industrial site has some legacy contamination. The important thing is that none of it affects our development plans. How can you be sure? Because we've done extensive testing. The levels of contamination are well within acceptable limits for commercial development. Ewan nodded as if satisfied, but he was remembering what Dean had told him about the environmental assessment. The contamination was far worse than minor issues, and developing the land without proper remediation could be dangerous. Caleb was lying. The question was whether Natalie knew he was lying. I appreciate you showing me all this, Ewan said. It's given me a lot to think about. I hope it's given you something to be excited about. This project is going to change everything for Ravens Hollow. The question is whether you want to be part of that change or watch it happen from the sidelines. I want to be part of it, but I need to make sure I'm protecting my neighbors' interests as well as my own. Of course. That's what makes you valuable to us. The people of this town trust you. When you tell them something is good for them, they believe you. The weight of that trust settled on Ewan's shoulders like a heavy coat. These people had known him since he was a child. They'd seen him grow up, get married, risk his life in the mines. When he spoke, they listened. And Caleb wanted to use that trust to help them get robbed. I should head home, Ewan said. Natalie's making dinner tonight. Actually, she's not. We have another investor meeting this evening. I thought you knew. Another lie. Natalie had texted that she wouldn't be home until tomorrow. She must have forgotten to mention it, Ewan said casually. These meetings must be pretty intensive. When there's this much money involved, everyone wants to make sure all the details are perfect. Tonight we're finalizing some of the land acquisition agreements. Anyone I know? The Peterson farm, actually. Beautiful property. Perfect for our luxury cabin development. Ewan's stomach clenched. Jim Peterson was one of his father's oldest friends, a man who'd worked in the mines for 40 years before a back injury forced him to retire. The farm was all he had left. Jim selling? We made him an offer he couldn't refuse. $200,000 for 80 acres. $200,000 sounded like a lot until you realized that the land would be worth over $1 million once it was rezoned for commercial development. Jim was being cheated out of $800,000 and didn't even know it. That's great for Jim, Ewan said, keeping his voice neutral. He's been struggling since he had to stop working. See? That's exactly the kind of win-win outcome we're creating. Jim gets financial security, we get beautiful development land, and the community gets economic revitalization. Everybody wins. Exactly. Caleb clapped him on the shoulder. I knew you'd understand. You're not like some of the other locals. You can see the bigger picture. On the drive home, Ewan called Dean. We need to meet. Tonight. What happened? They're moving faster than we thought. And the situation is worse than we realized. They met at an all-night diner on the outskirts of town, a place where truckers stopped for coffee and nobody paid attention to quiet conversations in corner booths. Jim Peterson is about to get robbed, Ewan said without preamble. Meridian is buying his farm for $200,000. The land will be worth over $1 million once it's rezoned. Dean swore softly. Jim doesn't know? He thinks he's getting a great deal. Caleb made it sound like they were doing him a favor. We have to warn him. With what proof? If we tell Jim that Meridian is planning to flip his land for massive profits, what's to stop him from demanding a higher price? That just alerts them that someone's onto their scheme. So what do? We document everything. Every conversation, every meeting, every lie they tell. We build a case that exposes the entire fraud, not just one piece of it. How long do we have? Based on what Caleb said tonight, they're moving fast on the land acquisitions. Once they control enough property, they'll push through the environmental approvals and start construction. After that, it's too late. Dean pulled out his phone and showed Ewan a series of text messages. I've been talking to families in Pine Ridge, Montana, the people who were displaced by Meridian's last project. What did they say? Same pattern. Meridian comes in promising transformation and economic opportunity. They buy land from locals at below market prices, get the area rezoned, then develop luxury facilities that price out the original residents. How many families were displaced? In Pine Ridge? About 60% of the original population. They couldn't afford the increased property taxes and cost of living once the area was revitalized. And Meridian knew this would happen? They counted on it. The business model depends on displacing the local population and replacing them with wealthy outsiders who can afford premium prices. Ewan stared at the messages, feeling sick. They're not just stealing money, they're destroying communities. There's more. I found records of environmental violations at 3 of Meridian's previous projects. Groundwater contamination, illegal dumping, failure to properly remediate contaminated soil. They have a pattern of cutting corners on environmental safety. Do the regulatory agencies know about this? Some do, but Meridian has good lawyers and deep pockets. They pay fines and move on to the next project. What about criminal charges? Hard to prove. They're careful to stay just on the legal side of fraud. And when environmental problems surface, they blame the previous property owners or claim the contamination predates their involvement. Ewan finished his coffee and stood up. I need to get home. Natalie will be suspicious if I'm out too late. What's the next step? I keep playing along. Let them think they're recruiting me while I gather evidence of what they're really planning. Be careful, Ewan. If they figure out what you're doing, they won't. As far as they're concerned, I'm just a simple coal miner who wants to help his neighbors make some money. But as Ewan drove home through the dark streets of Ravens Hollow, he realized that being underestimated might be the only advantage he had. Left. The house was empty when he arrived, just as Caleb had predicted. Ewan checked his hidden cameras and found nothing new. Natalie hadn't been home all day. He spent the evening reviewing everything he'd learned, building a timeline of Meridian's activities and Natalie's involvement. The picture that emerged was worse than he'd imagined. His wife wasn't just having an affair. She was actively participating in a conspiracy to defraud her own community, and she was using her marriage to Ewan, his reputation, his relationships, his standing in the community, as tools to help her do it. The betrayal was so complete, so calculated, that it took his breath away. Around midnight, his phone buzzed with another text from Natalie. Miss you. Tomorrow's the big day. Can't wait to celebrate with you soon. Ewan stared at the message for a long time, then typed back, Miss you too. Can't wait to see what tomorrow brings.